It's been a long road getting from there to here. It's been a long time, but my time is finally here. And I can feel a change in the wind right now. Nothing's in my way. And they're not gonna hold me down no more. No, they're not gonna hold me down. Because I've got... There are several constants in life: death, taxes, and Star Trek. Not 5 minutes after the crew of Voyager finally reached home in mid-2001 did we have another Star Trek series debuting. Voyager, reviewed here, was the series where many people had decided, hey guys, maybe this is just too much. Voyager was not without its merits, but the perception was that Voyager was what happened when Star Trek became stale.
You're letting a program delude you.
The people who made Trek would have preferred a small break, but Paramount and its own network, UPN, wanted to have a new Trek series on in perpetuity. It's a Faustian bargain, but one where everyone gets 7 years' work, as long as they agree to wear onesies. Uber Trek Lord executive producer Rick Berman and new showrunner Brannon Braga had something very different in mind. Okay, not very different, but fairly different. But if we're being honest with ourselves, slightly different on a superficial level. Like how you see this logo around the world with different names all selling the same ice cream. Many ideas were kicked around about how to shake up the Trek universe, but nothing they decided to do actually shook up the Trek universe. It's like having an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in a pub. It sounds like a grand idea, but in practice self-defeating. Firstly, the new show wouldn't be set in the 24th century as the previous 3 shows had been, but instead would serve as a prequel to all Star Trek. It would be about Starfleet pioneers, set 100 years or so before the days of Kirk, Spock and McCoy. No pressure. While it would still be screened on Paramount's own channel, UPN, as Voyager had been, the new show would just be known as Enterprise, without the Star Trek branding, just in case Trek-phobic viewers were fooled into watching a show about a ship called Enterprise, since it clearly wasn't Star Trek. It's not a reboot either, since the new show would keep fairly closely to established canon, meaning any aliens that hadn't been met in later series couldn't technically be shown here, in theory.
Don't screw this up.
Enterprise would showcase the adventures, if I might use that word erroneously, of a prototype starship commanded by Captain Jonathan Archer, played by Scott Bakula of Quantum Leap fame. Archer is different from previous/future captains in that he's not bound by the Federation rules, since the Federation doesn't exist at this point, and neither do any of the rules. Also, he walks around in short shorts.
Oh boy.
Archer is an enthusiastic explorer, but also seems to escalate things faster than you'd expect after the relative restraint of other Trek captains. Some could call Archer a bit of an arsehole. Just a bit of an arsehole. Not actually a full-on complete arsehole, he's more of a left butt cheek inching closer to the cleft.
We can't be afraid of the wind, Ensign. Take us to Warp 4.
Scott Bakula is the MVP of Enterprise. He was by far the best known actor in the series at the beginning of the show's run, and he stayed that way after the show had wrapped. Archer is deliberately not depicted as a 100% virtuous block of granite like Picard, but he's also no Gabriel Lorca. Archer also never once says, "Oh boy."
You son of a bitch.
Archer is accompanied by his dog, Porthos, who he feeds prodigious amounts of cheese,
Chef's promised at least 6 kinds of cheese.
which in turn produces prodigious amounts of shit.
Something smells funny.
His second in command is Vulcan Science Officer Sub-Commander T'Pol, fresh off her smash Broadway appearances in Fiddler on the Roof.
With proper discipline, anything's possible.
Shorn of the beard, T'Pol is assigned to Enterprise, ostensibly to guide the humans in their first steps out into the galaxy, but more realistically, to be Archer's nagging mother.
As I've told you, the Vulcan Science Directorate has concluded that time travel is impossible.
Well, good for the Vulcan Science Directorate.
T'Pol, as a full Vulcan, is meant to portray no emotion, until all the episodes where, for whatever reason, she has to betray her emotions.
How long has it been
I beg your pardon.
since you've mated?
T'Pol is also an attempt to recreate the buzz Voyager had when Jerry Ryan was cast as 7 of 9. So T'Pol, unlike every other Vulcan female we've ever seen, wears a super tight clinging catsuit in almost every episode, and short shorts. Jolene Blalock managed to make a dry character into someone relatively interesting. As usual, the producers try to pair her up with other characters, initially hinting at something with Archer, a potential relationship we will call Archhole.
Thought I might give you one.
That's not necessary.
and later more explicitly making her and Trip a thing, which we will call to polyp, in a relationship teased like the hair of a news reporter from the 1980s. Until of course, the writers got cold feet and split them up.
I can't believe this.
In Star Trek of this era, a will they, won't they scenario will almost always end up as nah.
Then it's good that you're my superior officer, that we're not in a position to allow ourselves to become attracted to one another.
The captain's best bud, if you don't count the dog, is good old boy Commander Charles Tucker, known by everyone as Trip, possibly because he's a lousy electrician. He's the ship's engineer and gets a lot of the latter Riker type storylines, falling in love with aliens he shouldn't, getting pregnant, being cloned to save his life by harvesting organs from the clone Trip. What? Connor Trineer manages to make Trip the most likeable character in Enterprise, the character with the most heart, which is why his eventual fate is so galling to fans.
Thank you.
Also, he gets around in short shorts.
Just because a guy's in his underwear, you think the worst.
Dr. Phlox is the ship's only other alien. He's a denobulan, which in Trek terms means he gets all the weird sex things to make the other crew members clutch their pearls. He's got several hot wives, keeps animals in sickbay, and is a raving pervert who makes the other crew members cover each other in massage oil while he watches through a peephole, but more on that later.
Have you ever known them to mate outside their species?
John Billingsley makes the Doctor slightly detached from the rest of the crew, but he's a professional, compassionate doctor and a character the viewers like.
What if an alien race had interfered and given the Neanderthals an evolutionary advantage?
Lieutenant Malcolm Reed is the weapons officer. Reed is weird. He comes across as having no character, but he's rather uptight, hard to get close to, aloof. He's incredibly fatalistic.
Whether our beards continue to grow or not is of no concern to me. We will be dead. Unless some ship happens to cross our path, our bearded bodies will be discovered in about 3 or 4 years. Is that optimistic enough for you?
Initially, he forms a bit of a double act with Trip, and when I mean double act, he's really there just to annoy Trip with his fussiness. A superb parody of how Americans perceive the English.
You ignored a tactical alert for this!
Basically how not a single person in the UK behaves, outside of a small radius of middle-class London areas.
They're called phase pistols. They have 2 settings, stun and kill. It would be best not to confuse them.
Later on in the series, he just becomes Action Man. Additionally, he gets around in short shorts.
How on earth did you know?
Who knows what was living on that ship? What if we picked up something your scans can't detect? I could stay in here all day.
Linda Park is linguistics specialist Ensign Hoshi Sato. This being the early days of Starfleet, a lot of tech taken for granted by later series is still at its formative stages in Enterprise, including the Universal Translator that magically makes everyone understandable to each other. Here, the Universal Translator takes about one good knock-knock joke to fully translate an alien language, so Hoshi's function is to get there a bit early, often by who's there.
Are you sure it's safe to stand so close to that?
Hoshi starts the series absolutely terrified by most things to do with interstellar travel.
Took a while, but I think I finally got my space legs.
But she does wear short shorts. Hoshi is possibly the only regular female character in Star Trek to have a one-off fling in an episode that doesn't result in her partner turning out either to be a conman, hologram, robot, evil villain, scientist, ball of light, ghost, spy, or Worf. Lastly, and it has to be said leastly, is helmsman Travis Mayweather. It's hard to describe Travis's character since he wasn't really given one, or many episodes that focused on him, or gave him much to do apart from flying the ship or the shuttle pod. Mayweather is a space boomer, a kid who grew up on an interstellar cargo freighter, which is Mayweather's only identifiable trait.
That isn't fair.
Despite getting around in short shorts, Travis is that character in almost every Trek that the writers are happy to ignore and not expand their character at all, like Uhura, Dr. Crusher, Harry Kim, Chakotay, or that chick with the eye on Discovery. I think her name is Carla, or is it Kara? Callie? It has to be said that Reed, Hoshi, and Travis in particular aren't well utilised in the latter half of the series. Enterprise is set in a period before the founding of the Federation, with Starfleet taking its first tentative steps out into the galaxy, often against the advice of the Vulcans, who are portrayed in this series as obstructive, patronising, and in the case of T'Pol, clad head to toe in activewear one size too small. In trying to break away and make a Star Trek show not feel like a Star Trek show, Enterprise was the first Trek series not to have a title sequence set in space with a rousing theme tune. Instead, it's got a montage of stock footage set to a recycled power ballad written by power ballad guru Diane Warren. To make matters worse, the song Where My Heart Will Take Me had already been used in the movie. Patch Adams, yes, Patch Adams' Sloppy Seconds was the theme tune to a Star Trek series. The title sequence was originally set to U2's song Beautiful Day, which shows just how cheap Paramount was, but we got the song that is known by most people by its chorus refrain, Faith of the Heart. It never at any stage works, but you did get used to its cheesiness in the first 2 seasons. If the opening titles were disappointing, especially in the days before they were accompanied by a skip intro button, the end credits feature a melancholic instrumental by regular Trek composer Dennis McCarthy. The tune's known as Archer's Theme, and it's easily one of the best things about the show. You can break up the series into 3 distinct sections. The first 2 seasons were nominally about exploration and meeting lots of familiar races for the first time, such as the Klingons or the Andorians, and avoiding the use of all things that later series took for granted, like holodecks and replicators. And you, the viewer, are sitting at home with snacks and candy and soda pop waiting for it to get better. Next Generation got better after a few seasons. Deep Space Nine got better after a few seasons. Even Voyager sort of got its shit together. So what about Enterprise?
I'll keep you posted.
From day one, there was an attempt to have a big story lurking in the background, one they could dip into every now and then, a temporal Cold War, which has some entity in the future directing a race of beings called the Suliban, who act as their agents in Archer's time, usually led by this guy. Occasionally, Archer would be guided by Time Agent Daniels, who pops up from time to time to give Archer a tantalizing view of his future. Lucrative convention appearances, semi-professional fan videos, and shipping. But in general, Enterprise was a show that was stuck in the tail end of these types of show having to be self-contained episodes, so as to not scare off viewers who didn't want to tune in every week. Most network series were much the same way, but I don't give 2 shits about NCIS. Deep Space Nine was able to have longer story arcs bubbling away in the background, but Voyager's overall story arcs rarely went past the climax of a 2-part story. TV itself was changing, while Star Trek was not. Star Trek was that guy who's still wearing the same Metallica t-shirt from their 1994 Shit Hits the Shed tour, which not only conjures up a certain unflattering image, but also, unfortunately, an unflattering smell. Enterprise all too quickly falls into a rut of the same 2 standalone story types happening over and over. 2 crew members are thrust together in a dire survival situation, or the crew encounter some society needing to be freed. The show wasn't necessarily bad, but it was fairly broad and unfocused, like using the drunken attendees of a bachelor party as a search posse looking for a missing hiker. You might as well have an episode where Trip gets pregnant, you might as well have an episode where the captain's dog gets sick, or Trip and Malcolm get mugged by girls who turn out to be aliens. You do get the excellent pilot, Broken Bow, where Enterprise's maiden voyage is an errand of mercy involving some peeps they just met for the first time, the Klingons. There's a nifty flashback episode showing some Vulcans who crash-landed on Earth in the 1950s.
Fascinating.
Or Trip falling for someone who's a third wheel in some alien race's 3-way reproductive system.
It's my fault. I'm responsible.
You're damn right you are.
And then every now and then the writers throw us a bone and go back to the semi-interesting temporal Cold War storyline from the pilot, but often it feels like they're going through the motions.
The Romulan Star Empire. What's that?
Maybe you shouldn't be reading that.
Behind the scenes, co-creator and showrunner Brennan Braga found it hard to find writers who could give the show what it needed, and he himself takes responsibility for the show's travails, namely that it was too familiar, too safe, and in those early years, disappointing. Enterprise is a series literally about going where no man has gone before, yet puts out vibes that make a long-time Trek viewer filled with a sense of déjà vu, where everyone has gone many times. Familiar character types, familiar storylines, and of course a lot of returning guest artists from other Trek shows, just wearing different makeup. Hiding that this was Star Trek didn't work, because the show is quite obviously another Star Trek series. It's early Starfleet, so the transport is used sparingly in the early years. They use phased pistols and phased cannons rather than phasers. There was no prime directive holding them back.
But until somebody tells me that they've drafted that directive, I'm going to have to remind myself every day that we didn't come out here to play God.
Yet, the thing you'll remember is another attempt to show that things weren't as evolved as in later years.
Is this really necessary?
And after returning from an away mission, the more attractive cast members had to strip to their underwear and rub decontaminant gel all over each other while Phlox observes. It's as creepy and sleazy and obvious as it sounds. Also, why did it take them this long to think of this? After excellent ratings for the series opener, the ratings didn't stay that way. The ratings were never as good as UPN had hoped for.
On behalf of the entire crew, I sincerely apologize.
For the show's third season, the producers boldly shook things up in a major way that they hoped would breathe new life into the series.
All right, what do you got?
They added the words Star Trek to the show's title, but to get there, they had to set things up at the end of season 2. Earth has been attacked by some aliens, and 7 million people from Florida are wiped out. No biggie. But since 3 tourists from Los Angeles were at Disney World, the Federation is out for blood. A new alien race, the Xindi, well technically 5 alien races, have decided that destroying Florida is not enough because some Floridians may have been outside the blast zone. So, to be absolutely safe, they will blast the entire planet.
And the human threat will finally be eliminated.
Enterprise embarks on a mission to enter the Expanse, now on Amazon Prime, and try to prevent the Xindi from destroying Earth. The ship now has some Marines on board, who appear whenever the producers remember they'd been written into the show. T'Pol has left her role as Vulcan advisor to the Enterprise and become a fully fledged member of the crew, yet still wears some bright and clingy Lululemon gear rather than the looser blue Starfleet uniforms. The storylines would focus on a continuing arc, with the occasional standalone episode not directly related to the search for the Xindi.
It's been a long road getting from there.
And lastly, the theme tune that no one loved was somehow made even worse in the cheapest way possible, with the power ballad backing was nixed in favour of an up-tempo country and western feel remix, keeping the same vocal track. It's hard to improve on perfection, but apparently it's very easy to fuck up a mistake. The highly disliked decontamination massage scenes fooled no one.
You must really be proud of yourself.
And people managed to keep their clothes on in later seasons, rather than having to strip and lather on Purell. But instead, we got Trip and T'Pol's tantric sex sessions disguised as acupressure. Obviously, having Florida laid waste was Enterprise's take on September 11, which happened only a few weeks before the show's debut in October 2001. The resultant season-long arc gave Archer's character some grit, especially when he's prepared to go to any lengths to protect Earth from further Xindi attacks.
Once you rationalize the first misstep, it's easy to fall into a pattern of behavior.
I'm not rationalizing anything. I know full well what I'm doing.
I can't justify this course of action.
We don't have a choice.
I won't let you do it!
The show does improve in the 3rd and 4th season, with the stories being a little more focused. The Xindi arc stretched over an entire season may have been a stretch, but the series had seen a definite improvement in quality and reception of episodes, if not the ratings. For the 4th season, Brannon Braga stepped back, and the show was now under the control of showrunner Manny Coto, an avowed Star Trek fan, and it was an attempt to make the series more Trek-like. It was far more Star Trek-y and attempted to link Enterprise to the original series, but by now perhaps the series was just too far gone for many people to care. In a world when any episode that doesn't concentrate on the main storylines are decried as filler, the very best Trek was pretty much always filler. Season 3 had tried to emulate 24's success by making most of the episode one long story. Season 4 would dial that back a bit and mix multi-episode arcs with standalone episodes. The season would edge further towards wrapping up everything they felt they needed to show before the series wrapped, meeting enough aliens to have at the founding at the Federation. The captain gets him some with another captain. T'Pol and Trip is on again, off again, off again, on again.
To Sub-Commander T'Pol.
And even Travis scores. Okay, so she was a spy, but it still counts. With the show poised for cancellation, the budget was reduced.
I can't believe I'm hearing this.
But this became a strength, with multi-episode arcs allowing the production people to spread the budget further. You had less money per episode, but you could spread the cost of sets and costumes over 3 episodes. So in some ways the show actually looks a lot better. Or would have been if the cost cutting hadn't also meant that the show would no longer be shot on 35mm film, but instead recorded onto HD video. Nowadays everything is filmed in HD video, but at the time the tech was so new that a lot of color grading pipelines weren't yet in place. So while it looks very crisp, it looks like video. Star Trek series like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine and Voyager all ended after 7 seasons, mainly because the economics of making the show would change after 7 years, since the cast would conceivably cost too much for Paramount to bear. This time, in a cunning plan to foil viewer expectations, Enterprise was cancelled at the end of its 4th season. Well, we had faith of the heart. The last season gave us Vulcan shenanigans, Andorian kerfuffles, Romulan troubles, and Tellarite tomfoolery. Brent Spiner guested for a few episodes as Arik Sung, the great-grandfather of Data's creator, and now linked to the eugenics wars superhumans we later associated with Khan. We We had an explanation as to why original series Klingons didn't have ridges.
Some kind of genetic engineering? A viral mutation?
We do not discuss it with outsiders.
And we had another look at the Mirror Universe, complete with a time-travelling Constitution-class vessel. And of course, there are the last few steps before the Federation was founded. Since the producers knew the show was going to wrap, Enterprise does what every prequel does and attempts to fill in every single goddamn blank.
We have to face an unpleasant reality. Captain Archer's mission has failed.
And then Brannon Braga and Rick Berman decided that the best way to say goodbye to Enterprise was this.
End program.
Yes, the final episode is a holodeck flashback for Will Riker and Counselor Troy on board the USS Enterprise D, ostensibly during the episode The Pegasus from the 6th season of Star Trek The Next Generation. The final episode is set 6 years after the penultimate episode, with the crew having been together for 10 years, yet look mostly the same. Almost nothing seems to have happened in that 6 years apart from Trip and T'Pol having broken up. Not a single person seems to have gotten a transfer, or a promotion, or even grown a dodgy beard. Enterprise is to be decommissioned ahead of Archer giving a commencement address that kicks off the United Federation of Planets. But then some small-time plot happens and Trip is killed. It's not necessarily a terrible episode on its own, but it's a terrible, terrible way to end the series. After Next Generation's amazing finale, the pressure to do something great for the final episode of a Star Trek series had not really produced anything half as good, but a flashback episode in someone else's show is really something else.
He's cute.
I never managed to get that invested in the show or the characters, but oh boy did I feel anger at this. Anger for the cast mainly. Seeing their show cancelled early is bad enough, and then finding out that your swan song is a holodeck callback. It's like the only version of the treasured video of your child's first step is from some arsehole's Mario 64 meme on TikTok. Enterprise is a show that is good. It's not terrible, rarely great, also rarely awful. It's fairly consistent in quality, but it has such a hard time trying to create a compelling experience that sticks with you. I can't name too many great or terrible episodes, but A Night in Sickbay is pretty poor. It's all a bit of a blur. It pulls the amazing trick of making you remember Voyager more fondly. I hadn't watched the series since its original broadcast, and watching it again after 15 years made me realise how little of it I had remembered, and almost nothing from the final season. These episodes are good. These episodes are not so good. Unlike previous Treks, Enterprise rarely cast big-name guest actors, with only a few appearing throughout the series. Joanna Cassidy, Peter Weller, Dean Stockwell, James Cromwell.
Board their ship! Take everything you can!
And most bizarrely of all, Seth MacFarlane, creator of Family Guy, and of course, The Orville. It did have appearances from other Trek actors such as Deep Space Nine's Rene Auberjonois, and had episodes directed by Michael Dorn, LeVar Burton, Roxanne Dawson, and Robert Duncan McNeil, who played Tom Paris in Voyager. Remember folks, Tom Paris is a dick. Voyager had been the first Star Trek series to go purely CG for shots of spaceships in space being all spacey because they're in space. Enterprise continues this, but by now CG was playing a much larger role in general, from purely CG characters down to making Phlox's goofy smile or making a baby's ears look Vulcan. I mean, you can accept dated effects the same way you accept 50-something Hollywood stars pretending they're in their 30s. I mean, enough gin makes anything possible. Production design on Star Trek was always a strength, and while Enterprise's claustrophobic interior submarine look was a nice change from the Scranton Holiday Inn look, it does make things look a little dim and dark. Like watching a Zack Snyder movie while wearing sunglasses. Enterprise was the first Trek to be made in widescreen, which was the fashion at the time, though it was still finished as a standard definition end product for the first 2 seasons, with only the latter 2 seasons made in HD resolutions. So, like the scripts, the image quality gets sharper as you go. You can now see the look of resignation on Anthony Montgomery's face in all its glory. All through Enterprise's run, UPN was in upheaval, no longer the upstart network relying on Star Trek. It was now run by people with no empathy for the show, which to be fair is what most TV shows have to deal with. These were people in no mind to leave the show purely up to Berman & Co, as had been the case with previous series. Paramount itself was in flux, splitting into separate TV and movie companies, with Trek being split like a watermelon at a sword testing facility. The Star Trek franchise itself was like the end of Tuvix, though without Janeway's moralizing. Star Trek was cancelled for several reasons, and at a time when it had become pretty good. But the writing was already on the wall, with the network upset that Season 3 had ended with a cliffhanger, and they gave the show another year just to avoid dealing with the Star Trek fans. I mean, can you blame them? Even then, UPN itself didn't last that long, when it was merged with the WB to form the CW. Just like the start of Tuvix. Star Trek had stuck to its format for a very long time, tweaking things as time marched on, but never enough for Trek to not seem very old-fashioned by the time of Enterprise. Its improvements weren't enough to rescue a series that many had bailed on after the first year or two, and not enough viewers had returned for the better second half. That said, apart from the temporal Cold War, which was left dangling like the last bungee jumper at closing time, the series did manage to wrap up enough loose ends that you at least get some form of closure. But then, that last episode is a kick in the guts for both the makers of the show and the viewers.
Well, I hope you'll tell all your friends. Set the record straight.
I might not have loved this crew or this series, but I did like it. Star Trek Nemesis had definitely killed the movie franchise for a while, and Enterprise was the end of a golden age of Trek where 4 series combined would produce over 600 hours of television between 1987 and 2005. Enterprise, or Star Trek Enterprise, did find an appreciative audience in syndication, and again once it became available on streaming services, where all Trek series have found new audiences. Voyager and Enterprise are now being re-evaluated. Star Trek's Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds show that there's a hunger for Star Trek, or that the studio will screw it for what it's worth in order to anchor its streaming ambitions. It wouldn't be until 2017 before Trek returned to the small screen. And by then, a lot of things had changed.
This is Captain Archer aboard the starship Enterprise. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for your transmission.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.